Hi, I'm Maria Theohara Silvelos on social media. Welcome back to So Over 50 podcast on So Organised Style. Stay listening.
So Organised Style podcast acknowledges traditional owners of country throughout Australia. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to the elders past, present and emerging.
Thanks for joining us on So Over 50 podcast on So Organised Style. So Over 50 intersects with all communities. We're a community that is so over ageism. As Sandy mentioned on Friday's So Over 50 Instagram live event to celebrate the 40,000 follower milestone, Teresa, or at Desotropia, is today's So Over 50 podcast guest. Teresa has developed an Etsy list of craft small businesses based in Ukraine so that we can support them directly. And right now, Etsy has removed the seller fees for these businesses. Teresa, thank you for being today's So Over 50 guest and for coming on at such short notice.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Just so that our listeners know, where do you live?
I live in a city in the Andes in Ecuador called Cuenca. It's about maybe, I think, 600,000 people up here at about 2,500 meters or approximately like 8,000 feet altitude. So pretty high up here.
Teresa, you're the first person that has been on the podcast from Ecuador. So congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. We're in the same hemisphere, at least.
I know. Yeah. The reason I asked that question, listeners, is because Teresa is here because she's developed some information for us that we can use to help people out. And the question I'm going to ask you, and you can take it from there, Teresa, what motivated you to develop the listing to support Ukrainian sewing businesses?
I'm sure most people are feeling similarly, and that it's just really hard to watch these events unfold and not be able to do really anything about it. Not just where we are, I mean, so far away from Ukraine, but just in general. My son's best friend, my son is 10, and his best friend is from Ukraine. And I was listening to them play and just feeling like I'm glad my son is playing, with his friend, because it takes his mind off the stress and his, his family, his whole family is here, but they also have friends and family back in Ukraine, and they're just really stressed.
Yeah.
A lot of grief over the situation going on in his house. So I just wanted to just try to do something that I could do. The idea wasn't even my idea. All I did was a little bit of legwork. The idea actually, there's a Instagrammer named Daydreams of Quilts, and her name is Anita, and she's in Canada. And she posted a little post with the idea. And I thought, oh, great. Yeah, I'll do that. And then I thought, well, a lot of people probably don't want to go through the trouble to look all these businesses up. And so, I can do that. Before I retired, I was a web developer. So it's not a big thing for me to put up a web page or anything like that. So I did that. It's got really nice response. And I bought a bunch of things. My mother-in-law wanted to buy something, but she doesn't do any kind of crafty things. So she bought something for me that I could make for my son. And it's been nice to see that people are really willing to, just for a few dollars, buy a pattern from someone. It's been really nice, but it's also been a little heartbreaking because a lot of the sellers have written back to me, thanking me, but also telling me a little bit about the situation, which, as you can imagine, is really, it's just gut wrenching. So it's a way to get them a little income. I think all of the people I've listed so far, and I hope any of your listeners, if they have any, they can send them to me. I can add them, or they can just copy and paste it to wherever they want. I mean, it's just free to use whatever you want to do with. It's a small little thing, but it's just, the world's made up of small things. And so if we all do something small, it becomes something big. So I hope that, we can help them through this time.
It's one way of giving them some sort of support when we can't actually be there to help them and safeguard their livelihoods and their lives.
I have never been to Ukraine, but I've been to Moldova, their neighbor. And in fact, this shawl was made by my friend in Moldova. And I've read that I think there's 1 out of 8 children in Moldova now is a refugee from Ukraine. My husband and I have a lot of friends in Moldova, and he himself has been a little, stressed about just hearing about everything and hearing what is going on, and they're all trying to find ways to help. And another thing that, has been kind of going around, I think CNN wrote an article about how people are hiring Airbnbs that they don't plan to stay in. And I think that's a wonderful way, because a lot of those people who do own those Airbnbs are actually hosting refugees in them. So there's all these little ways that we from across the globe can just sort of support those businesses. There's a lot of legit charities that are doing good work, but this is just another way to get in there.
There are the large organizations that are set up to be able to help. They've got all the infrastructure, etc., and you can provide assistance to them that way. This spreadsheet or this database that you've got helps us directly help the actual person.
Yeah.
It's what you feel comfortable with doing. And if you're not comfortable doing that, that's fine. But if you really want to help someone directly, your database is the way to go about it.
It goes right into their pockets. The idea also was a little bit inspired by when Hurricane Katrina happened in New Orleans. My husband's grandmother, she went into like the Houston Stadium and talked to people individually and said, what do you need personally? And then she solicited donations from all of us, friends and family. And then she went out and bought those things. Like she bought backpacks, and some of the things that people were asking for were things you wouldn't maybe have thought of, and maybe the charities aren't providing. And some of them were just like, underwear, things people really left without anything. So it was another way to, make a difference one person at a time in little ways. And so this is another way that it goes directly to a person whose business has been affected, whose life has been upturned.
Perfectly said. It's one way of being able to help another person directly.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples of what's on the listing?
Oh, sure. And one of the things I really made a point of doing was going to each seller's page, and almost all of them have a picture of the person, their name, what city they're in. Mm-hmm. And it really made those people, real. Olga, Tatiana, Svetlana, Oksana. I think all of the sellers are actually women in this case. And I believe today is International Women's Day. So
the day that we're recording this, yeah.
Yeah, the day we're recording. I would say that the majority, I think there's a wide variety. There's some sewing patterns. There are a lot of crochet patterns and knitting patterns. I bought a couple of those knitting patterns. There's a woman who sells vintage knitting patterns, lovely things that you could make cross stitch. And I bought a few of those. A lot of little adorable little felt toys. You could make, Christmas ornaments and things like that. One of the sellers actually sold digital books that featured Ukrainian cross stitch. There's a name for the beautiful shirts and the traditional blouses that they make. And so one store sells those as a digital download. Yeah, just a lot of creative patterns and instructional videos and things like that they sell.
That's good for listeners to know so that they can hop online and have a look.
Yeah.
So where can they find the listing?
It's teresahardy.com. That's Teresa without an H, but Hardy with an H, Hardy. Yeah, and you'll just go to that main page, and there's 2 links there. Really simple, nothing fancy, but it'll take you to the 2 different versions of the list if you want to check it out. I have my own website, but I don't use it for anything except for right now it's hosting these 2 links. One of them goes to a really simple, all text with the links version of the list. And another one goes to a page that I tried to zhuzh up a little bit and put some picture previews, and also a link to their Instagram if I can find it. Some of them may have an Instagram account that I just couldn't find, but most of them do, so that you can follow them on Instagram and kind of see what they're up to as well.
Thank you so much for doing that service for the people in the Ukraine, so that we can at least do something to help them directly if that's what we're able to do.
Yeah. I'll continue to add links as people send them to me. People have sent me a few new shops that weren't on the list, and I'm happy to add them. And like I said, anybody wants to take the list and do whatever they want with it, take the code, go for it, whatever gets it out there.
Brilliant. When did you start sewing, and what made you start sewing?
I'm learning to knit. But my main craft is sewing, and I've been sewing since I was a little girl. I wanted to make clothes for my dolls, and then for my cats, and then for me. And I'm short, so nothing ever fit me. And I wanted things to fit me. So it's sort of a necessity for shorties to know how to sew, I think. Unless you're an average size, you should probably know how to sew, because everything needs an alteration.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the reason I got you on is because Judith of Sew Over 50 gave me your name. So when did you discover the Sew Over 50 community?
I really don't know. I started Instagramming kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. So I have like my own personal Instagram, but I started making one, and I didn't want to put my sewing things up on my personal Instagram, because it's just like, that's just a set of memories of my family for us. to share. And I don't know, someone must have found me from there. I used to have a live journal. Do you remember that live journal?
Yep.
Yeah, it was like in the early blogging days. And I used to have one that I put on my, all my sewing things on. But after my son came along, there's just no time for blogging. So yeah. So the Instagram's really easy. And, I must have seen somebody and followed the link and maybe started adding the hashtag, which is great because I feel sort of like I know them. And I love this little community of all of us sewists over 50. And it's great. Yeah, I think it's really sweet the way that, like the same people will always kind of, give you a little thumbs up on something you post. And it makes it feel so much like a community. They've done a great job of it. Really, really spectacular way of bringing people together. So,
they've got over 40,000 followers, but they work 24/7. Honestly, they really
do. It seems like it. It seems like it.
Yeah, they do. Teresa, it looks like silk is your favorite fabric to wear.
I would have everything in silk if I could have everything in silk. I just love silk. It's very hard to find here in Ecuador. I can find like Duponi silk. Fabric shopping here is not great. And so when I go to the US to visit family and stuff, I'm always shopping for fabric.
Great strategy.
Yeah, I mean, and I buy all in the same kind of color palette and everything. So anything I make kind of goes together as a little capsule. So at least that's the goal. But I just buy what I see, and I just fall in love sometimes and just buy it anyway. But I love silk. I think silk is so easy to work with, even like fine silk like this. It's crisp. You can press it, and it just has that nice, nice feeling.
It's a lovely feel. Can I ask you again about your sewing? Teresa, what's your favorite make?
My favorite thing sewing wise is making my Halloween costumes. Yeah. I know it's silly. I like making my own clothes. Every year around Halloween, getting an idea in my head and coming up with a Halloween costume that's usually a group theme costume for my family. That's my favorite thing. So I guess, in the last, I think 3 years in a row, I won the Halloween costume contest. And so I guess I could say that I won, yay. One year we went as Ecuadorian street food. And one of my favorite ones was I made a 2-person love seat. So my husband and I, it's like a little sofa. I don't know if it's called a love seat everywhere. The pun did not go over well here in Ecuador. No one got it, but it was still a hit to see 2 people walking around dressed as like a little sofa. And then my son was a couch potato, which is another pun that no one got. Yeah, things like that. I really love, like my one time a year, I love just sewing.
It's a group thing, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be perfect. That's a nice thing too. I mean, before my son came along, I would never have dreamed of using Velcro even on a Halloween costume. It would have been hand sewn vintage snaps, and I did that. But after him, it's like, just bring the Velcro, staple it, But yeah, so there's a freedom in that no one's really going to look on the inside, and it, I usually only end up wearing it once, and then I, give it away.
Yeah, thank you for that. What's a trend that you are enjoying sewing at the moment?
I love big poofy sleeves. And I know that that's been around for a couple of years, or at least since I started this Instagram, I've noticed all these big poofy sleeves. I am not over it. Bring the big poofy sleeves. I love them. They present a challenge when you try to get them inside a coat or some overgarment. That's just another challenge to tackle. Like I made some capes so that my sleeves can come out and,
Good idea.
Yeah. I like the big, the big poofy sleeves.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what keeps you sewing?
What capes?
What motivates you to keep sewing? Sorry, I'm being too Australian.
What capes are you sewing? Okay.
It's not winter right
sorry. Yeah, it's not here either. It is up north, but what keeps me sewing, my son has been in virtual school almost 2 years, most of the last 2 years. They just went back to presencial. And so they're in person school. Now, I have all this daytime, free time. But one of the things that I find that sewing does for me is it really helps me just break some bad habits. Like during the middle of the pandemic, I just noticed our drinking, we would drink a lot of wine in the evening and stuff. And, it just got to be kind of like habitual, but I'm just somebody who has to always be doing something. So if I am sewing, it keeps me I get super into it, and it keeps me from indulging in some bad habits. That is one thing that keeps me sewing, and one thing that sewing keeps me doing, which is, doing something productive and positive in my evenings rather than just, let's watch some YouTube and have a glass of wine, like that. Yeah. So, the start of the pandemic, we just kind of didn't know what to do. We were all stressed out. But then during the middle, I just said, I need a more positive, hobby and more positive activities, especially in the evenings when there's not going out,
Yeah. At that stage, there was no end to when we were going to go out either. Like I noticed in Australia, it kept getting extended and things would happen. Yeah. So having something to keep you occupied, like sewing, is really helpful.
Yeah. And it's funny because I actually learned a lot about your situation and the situation in New Zealand from following all the Instagrammers I followed that were down here in this half of the world. And and really learning from people saying, oh, we're in another lockdown. I don't really get news about Australia here. Even if it's world news, it's like the fact that you guys are going into another lockdown isn't like big news enough to make it everywhere. Right. So, but it's interesting to find out what is really going on with other people. And you find that out sort of by, just being part of a world community.
Yep. If we sort of keep going along that point, the fact that you've use the idea of how can we support people in the Ukraine directly, and you've gone ahead and put this database together so that we can now have a look at and support someone directly, has been one of those things that, we can't get on the news, but we can get through Instagram and through a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I haven't taken it further, but there's probably, I focus sort of on the things that I would be interested in, craft things, but there are also, digital content, such as graphics and design, graphic design that you could use in some elements, or photography perhaps, that could also be a digital download that I didn't include because it's not, I'm just trying to keep it focused. And then, there's other people who could maybe, someone out there listening might want to do something like that. Took that idea and did that for some digital content or some other digital content besides this crafty stuff.
Yep.
There aren't that many sellers on Etsy. I mean, the list is maybe, 25 or something at this point. There's not that many, but hopefully more will turn up.
Yep. Hopefully people will start contacting you with more that they know of, and that can then go onto the list. So that's really great that A, you've created it, and B, that we've had the chance to chat about it and give people a heads up on, hey, this is available. And if you know more, go here. Yeah. I was thinking, even if you don't have anything you want to buy right now, you can always, favorite a store or favorite a product, go back to your Etsy later when you're feeling more flush and buy something later, because these people are going to need support for a long time. I hope this conflict will be over soon, but even when it is, they're going to still need our support. So it's, now is really important for them, but, even later will be important for them to get back on their feet. In the long term, there's a lot of work that's going to need to be done, and any sort of support that people can give them either directly or indirectly now, or when, as you say, when, you've got more money, it would be really useful. I plan to keep the list up probably indefinitely, so it'll be there. Any last words for our listeners? Thank you for listening. Thank you for having me. I listened to a couple of your other podcasts earlier, and I thought, oh, these people are, designing patterns and writing books. And, I am just honored that you wanted to have little old me here on your podcast. So thank you for listening. One of the key things with Sober 50 and with this podcast is we try and make those people in the community visible. So those people who are contributing, and you're contributing to the community. So thank you for being on the podcast. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, Teresa. Listeners, if you want to be a guest editor about a topic that you wish to share with So Over 50 followers, make sure you direct message So Over 50 on Instagram. And have a lovely day, listeners. This episode of So Over 50 podcast on So Organised Style was produced by me, Maria Theoharis, with permission of Teresa, sound by bensound.com. You can subscribe to So Organised Style podcast, but with an S, not a Z, on all good podcast apps. Make sure you go back and listen to our free So Over 50 podcast archive. And if you can, consider supporting the production of this podcast on Patreon. We look forward to joining you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.